Welcome. Today we're going to talk about Mesopotamia again. We're going to talk about Mesopotamian states. So Mesopotamia was a collection of city-states, not a united empire, and what this means is each city was kind of its own independent government, basically served as its own country. Early city-states formed near rivers, and you can see on this picture here, these little purple dots would be examples of city-states in Mesopotamia, and you can see that they are along the river. Most cities develop their own independent government. This is called a city-state, as we said, where they have their own government, kind of functions as their own country. Sometimes they even have their own little religious niche to them. These cities developed their infrastructure and powerful institutions to help them organize the people living in Mesopotamia. And their infrastructure would include defensive walls, ziggurats, palaces, housing, and roads. It would also include irrigation canals and other things they would need for farming. One of the most important things, aside from the irrigation that they would have, would be the defensive walls. These are built around the city for protection against an attack. Sometimes these walls would be 3 deep. They usually were several stories tall, sometimes very thick, and several miles around the city to protect it from an attack. And then outside you would have farmland and other resources being produced. And workers work together to construct these various things such as a defensive wall, also temples and palaces. Here you can see an example of a ziggurat, which would be a pyramid temple. And this is probably an incomplete ziggurat. You probably have further steps up above it. And at the top you would have a shrine to signify the chief god or goddess of the city, and that's where they could offer sacrifices and other things. Palaces, on the other hand, were the center of the government. They housed the king and queen, and you can see kind of an overview of what it would look like here. You have your private rooms, your throne, inner and outer court, storage for goods, and this is where the government would meet and act, and the government was very important for helping with farming and helping with defenses. So people worked together to build housing. This was often made out of mud bricks and reeds for the people to live in, and also roads, which made it easier to travel or trade, and for the army to travel as well. Two of the biggest institutions we talked about briefly were the religion and the government. The most important person in religion was priests and priestesses, and then eventually government is going to be run by kings. Early on, priests and priestesses served both as the leader of religion and government. The religious duties included making sacrifices, such as animals like the goat you see here, leaving food for the gods, performing rituals, building shrines to try to please the gods and bring favor for their city. They were also involved in government, writing and enforcing laws, serving as judges, and controlling land ownership and trade. As government becomes more complex, they're going to have a new group, and this is going to be your kings, and the kings are going to become leaders put in charge of non-religious duties, such as the government. And this is so that priests and priestesses could devote more time to religious responsibilities. So the main job of the government was to maintain law and order. We talk about the Code of Hammurabi, which was a list of codes that Hammurabi published in Babylon, which is in Mesopotamia, of things that people had to follow. It was known as an eye for an eye justice system, but in reality there wasn't real equality in the law. Men had more rights than women, children had less rights than adults, and wealthy had more rights than non-wealthy, and slaves had very few rights. So the Code of Hammurabi was published. They weren't necessarily new laws, but it allowed the king to tell everybody what their jobs would be they have to follow. They were also in charge of commanding and protecting the people using the army from outside attacks, and maybe even taking over land outside of their own area and gaining land from neighboring areas. So one part is the military, maintain order both in the city and outside the city. The other thing is agriculture. They had to ensure crop production, make sure that people were well fed, and this was done largely through public works projects, with the most important one being irrigation canals. They used math to figure out how to plant crops, and they developed advanced features such as a plow to help in addition to canals. And then they are also in charge of other public works projects such as defensive walls, which protect them from an attack. So these are public works that are good for the community, and they are things that the whole community contributes to making. All right, thanks for listening. If you have any questions, let me know, and I'll talk to you later. Bye.